Well, let's move on from that to something a little bit different. You've alluded to this already, but your job, it's got very clear administrative duties, but you also have maybe not as obvious creative duties.
Yes.
Would you say that your job is primarily one or the other? And if it is mostly one or the other, how do you balance those interests?
Actually, I would say that right now it is pretty equal. So, for example, we're in a 2-year plan, because we have a 50th anniversary coming up. Well, as part of that, we have some structural projects that, like we have an elevator that's getting installed. But because of that, I am designing a new library, which the creative skills of design layout and furniture and aesthetics and feelings, all that kind of stuff comes into play. And then we have a new exhibit going. And with that, I've got to ask, although I have an intern that I basically get to say, hey, we're going to go and look at content. I got to decide what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like. I got to pick fonts and graphics and and all the things that when you think of creative design, they kind of collide. And because we're in that planning mode of like, what do I want this to look like in 2 years? I have to be pretty specific. And from somebody with a creative mind as well, for us, it's a lot easier for us to say visually, I see this in my head. I know exactly what it needs to look like. Most people cannot be described. You cannot describe that and have pretty much anybody understand what you're talking about. Doesn't matter how much detail you go in. Doesn't matter how many colors you use to describe what it is that you're trying to, envision. It's just, you got to have those drawings. You got to have those written formats. You got to have those outlines. And that's a lot of the process from the administrative side.
It really is a skill to take something that can oftentimes be so abstract and almost ethereal to a certain extent, and to condense that into just a clear, concise message.
Yep. And being practical with it also is really important. Whether or not it's possible is one thing, but to be practical about what it is that you're working on. I have no doubt that there has been quite a few times that my board members have probably said in their heads that she's crazy. I cannot believe she's asking us to do this. And then it's all finished. And we get it.
We get it now.
Not because it was some crazy idea, but because it was still logical and practical. But because it's so different than what we're used to, it's a lot harder to explain to them so that they can envision the same thing I am.
That is interesting because just museums by their nature are such a conservative environment.
Yeah.
It's about maintaining that which was before for the sake of preservation, which that's the value. But then obviously coming in with a creative, like more emergent mindset, like what's the new thing? Well,
for us, we're in this really weird, haven't touched anything in there in terms of museum evolvement. So for us, we are in a drastic change. Not that we want to change exhibits, but we need to change how people interact with those exhibits. So we need to get some video in there or some interviews. We need to get some sound overheads, speakers, so that people can listen to people talking about the exhibits. We need some children's interactive engagement, maybe a cartoon that's talking to them, or interactive games so that they can learn about the things that are in front of them. As a museum that's older in a small town, this is where the fundraising is more important because we know that groups and schools and parents want to see that, but we are so far behind the curve and technology is not cheap.
No. It is unfortunately not.
And it's a process. You have to develop the content and then you need to design the aspect that you want. Is it going to be video? Is it going to be audio? What is my script going to look like? Are you going to do a free interview? Are you going to do a scripted interview? Are you going to get an illustrator to do the kids' content? There's so many administrative planning things that come before you even get to touch the creative stuff. So it's like a unfortunate precursor.
Yeah, it's funny. Every now and then I'll hear a story, and usually it's around like Hollywood movies where like, there was a movie, it fell apart, but if only they kept to the director's vision.
Oh, yeah.
But then it's like, well, actually, there's a lot of administrative work that goes into behind these things.
Yeah.
And sometimes the director may be well-intentioned, but is a little out of touch.
Yeah. And, that's where you hope that you have enough people around you who can kind of balance what your vision is. that's where board members for nonprofits come in really well, depending on what they're involved in. For me, it's the knowledge of the historical part. So the most important thing for me is I know what I'm good at and what I do well at. I also know what I'm not good at and what I'm not knowledgeable in. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to go seek those people to be involved in my experience who can fill that gap for me. And then I'm nice and balanced, and then they can keep me on track.
So you kind of alluded to something there. So your primary background is not actually in history.
Correct.
And yet you're the director of a history museum.
Yeah, interesting, right? So again, jack of all trades. It's kind of a weird thing because I have a creative side. I'm very resourceful, things like that. But just like in any business, there comes a time and the place where the transition isn't necessarily in the main topic of what your business is. For us, we're a history museum. We were set up in a way where we have content, we have exhibits people can look at, but we knew we needed to add more. But in the background, there was a bunch of things that need to be restructured so that in the future, when we have somebody who is more history oriented, they're not spending a majority of their day on the administrative stuff. They're going to be spending a majority of their time managing exhibits and developing content and telling the historical stories and building those out. Whereas before, the administrative and the organizational and the business side got a little bit more daunting of a task. So more time was spent on that. So I am in development of all of that. So whoever comes in, they don't need to understand it, but they do need to follow the process and the steps and the procedures and know who to bring in when they get to certain points.
So it kind of seems like we're in a bit of like a pendulum swing. At one point we swung really hard to the really high historical focus and just really enriching the exhibits that were there. But because of that high specialization, some other parts of the business suffered a bit of attrition. And so we're swinging back to really address those points and then setting up the groundwork for, are you like a new director that kind of meets in the middle?
Still more heavy on the history side, more heavy on the curation side. But yes, and we were fortunate enough that because of my creative side, as we were doing that swing, heavy on the administration, heavy on the business, I could still dabble in the exhibit enough to keep it like current as we were building. So we did like a little temporary exhibit, or we did like the John Deere tractor that's in the front corner right now. Okay, well, I made connections with people who were in that. So even though I designed it and I got the information, I may be an expert now, but I'm not an expert in that topic. So it's making sure that there is a time and a place for that to be in the front, to be the new priority for a limited time, and then taking a step back and then going back to the focus and then building. So now we've been a little bit more exhibit oriented. We had our country music thing this year. Our themes are more heavily history oriented. We're thinking about exhibits over the next year. So now it's a little bit more balanced, but I spend less time in the daunting day-to-day business administration stuff. But now the stuff that I enjoy, which is the strategic planning long-term, now I get to focus on that stuff.
Right.
So it's very much a building point of saying you need to start with your foundation and you need to build structure and efficiency in each step, and then you need to maintain it as you grow, and that is how you ultimately expand.
So I think that's an interesting example where the historical angle is, I don't want to use the word weak spot because I think that's a little harsh.
But it kind of is because it's a little bit more specialized.
Yes, that's a good word.
It's a little bit more specialized. So it's not weak as in the point, like it's a bad, it's the breaking point. It's just that it's, somebody needs to love history. They need to know how to research it correctly. And somebody who is resourceful can figure it out. But when you talk to, say, the intern that we have at the museum versus me, there's a very big difference in the conversation. Not that I don't enjoy it, not that I don't find it interesting, but when you listen to them speak, their background and their skill set and their experience just provides more to the conversation.
So, and like continuing with that idea, you've talked a little bit about how you surround yourself with employees specifically that are able to do skills that are specialized or have that interest that compensates for it.
Yeah.
With this historical angle, how have you historically been compensating for that lack of speciality?
Good board members, making sure that people are on our board that have that rich history, that rich heritage, the expertise, also knowing that I need to be in touch with them to know who they know. Because a lot of it, because it's local heritage, it's finding businesses who started here, people who ran those businesses because they grew up, if it's agricultural related, and I'm doing farming or agriculture or John Deere, you know, they didn't go, well, they might have gone to school for it, depending on what it is, but they lived it. They breathed it. They know all the ins and outs. They know how the business side works. They know how all the agricultural products come out of that. They know all of that. And the resourcefulness on my part benefits from the fact that then I can go and find those people, and I need to ask the questions, and I need to make the appointments, and I need to bring them in. And then I'm going to gather all the information and then ask how they want to participate in the project.
Interesting. So it's extensive interviews and almost like a consultation process where you're bringing them on board afterwards.
Yes. Jim Hale, he was the one who had the North Washington implement the John Deere dealership that was local. He was a big part of the exhibit that we did because he was a connection from my board member. Well, the employees that worked for that company were a connection from his part. So I literally just worked down the tree line of who's connected with who, what part did they play, and we did interviews, or I got more information, or they brought in things that were beneficial to the exhibit, or they fact checked me. So I literally brought in 2 or 3 different people, and I said, here's where I'm at. And I had a display out there, and I had my content printed, getting ready to go into final production. I said, critique away. Tell me what doesn't make sense. Did I spell something wrong? Does the date seem weird? And being willing to be critiqued is also really important, because that's how I grow, because it kind of tells me where my weak point is and how I find information, but it also makes sure that what I'm doing is truly correct.
Right.
Like I'm accurate in what I've found.